I'm probably the only person in history who received a six-figure insurance payout and a handwritten apology from my entire neighborhood because three entitled women decided my private property was their personal party barge. I didn't set out to orchestrate the most publicly humiliating, financially ruinous, and physically damp downfall of an HOA president, but when presented with the opportunity, I found I had a certain talent for it. Stick around, and let me tell you the absolutely bonkers story of how Brenda and her sisters learned a very public, very wet lesson in basic physics and the legal definition of trespassing. And hey, while you're settling in, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. You're not going to want to miss the sheer, unadulterated karma that gets served up in this one. It all started when I bought my slice of heaven, or what I thought was heaven at the time. It was a modest but beautiful house in a lakeside community, the kind of place with mature oak trees and mailboxes shaped like little lighthouses. The main selling point, the reason I stretched my budget to its absolute limit, was the small, private dock that came with the property. As a mechanical engineer who spent 40-plus hours a week dealing with stress tolerances and fluid dynamics in an office park, my dream was to spend my weekends on the water, tinkering with an old boat. And I had found the perfect one, a lovingly restored 1968 Starcraft Holiday, a classic aluminum runabout. It wasn't a yacht, it was a piece of history. 16 feet of gleaming, riveted aluminum, with polished chrome fittings and a two-stroke motor that gurgled like a happy troll. It was my pride and joy. I spent more time polishing it than I did cleaning my own house. Its official Coast Guard capacity plate, screwed firmly to the console and polished to a mirror shine, was unambiguous. Maximum persons. 4 or 600 pounds. That little plaque would become more important than the Declaration of Independence. Life was good for about 3 months. I'd wake up early on Saturdays, the mist still clinging to the lake, and take the Stardust, as I'd named her, out for a quiet spin. The neighbors were mostly older, retired folks who'd give a friendly wave. It was perfect. And then, I met Brenda. Brenda was the HOA president, a fact she would announce to you within 15 seconds of any conversation, as if it were a royal title. She was a woman who seemed to be perpetually clad in expensive but ill-fitting Lululemon attire, her face set in a permanent expression of sniffing something foul. She drove a pristine white Range Rover that was far too large for the narrow community roads and navigated them with the aggressive entitlement of a diplomat in a war zone. My first interaction was over my garden gnome. It was a gift from my grandmother, a cheerful little fellow holding a fishing rod. Brenda left a notice, printed on neon pink paper, stating that lawn ornamentation, Section 4, Subsection B, prohibited mythological or fantastical creatures. I, being an engineer, actually read the HOA covenants before I bought the place. I politely emailed her back, quoting the actual text, which prohibited ornaments over 18 inches in height. My gnome, Bartholomew, was a regulation 14 inches. I even attached a photo of him next to a tape measure. Her response was a terse, "I'll be watching you." This set the tone for our relationship. She'd cite me for my trash cans being visible from the street for 65 minutes past the 8 p.m. deadline. I'd respond with a time-stamped photo showing I moved them at 7:58 p.m. She'd complain about the excessive noise from my workshop, which was me using a handheld screwdriver. I started keeping a detailed log of her complaints, complete with dates, times, and my factual rebuttals. It was petty, yes, but my engineering brain is wired for documentation. Little did I know, I was building a case file for a much larger conflict. The true harbingers of doom, however, arrived one sweltering July afternoon. The white Range Rover disgorged two women who were, for all intents and purposes, larger, louder echoes of Brenda. These were her sisters, Cheryl and Diane. Where Brenda was sinewy and tense, her sisters were expansive. They moved with a sort of gravitational pull, their presence filling the space around them. They shared Brenda's air of supreme entitlement, but without her pretense of authority. They were pure, uncut arrogance. I was out on my dock, meticulously waxing the Stardust's mahogany dashboard, when they ambled down the community path. They stopped and stared at my boat, their conversation loud enough to carry across the water. "Oh, that's a cute little boat," Cheryl said, the word "little" dripping with condescension. "Brenda, does he ever let anyone use it?" Diane added, not even bothering to look at me, as if I were just part of the scenery. Brenda, standing with her hands on her hips, gave me a look that could curdle milk. "He's particular," she said, her voice tight. "Some people don't understand the concept of community assets." I just kept polishing, pretending I couldn't hear them. Community asset? I'd spent 2 years of my savings on this boat. It was as much a community asset as the fillings in my teeth. But this single comment was a massive red flag. It was a glimpse into their shared, warped worldview where my private property was simply an amenity they hadn't gotten around to using yet. My neighbor, an old retired Army colonel named Frank, who'd seen off 3 prior HOA presidents, wandered over later that day. "Saw you met the sisters," he said, chewing on an unlit cigar. "The Furies. When they show up, bad things tend to happen. Brenda gets 10 times worse trying to show off for them. Just a friendly warning, double-check your locks." I thanked him for the advice, making a mental note to check the security camera I'd been meaning to install. Brenda and her Furies had just moved from being a simple nuisance to a potential threat. I had no idea how literal that threat would become. The battle for the dock began in earnest. Having failed to intimidate me on land, Brenda turned her attention to the water's edge. It started with a formal violation notice regarding the color of my dock bumpers. They were black, standard-issue marine bumpers. Brenda's letter, citing a non-existent clause, declared that all dock accessories must be seafoam green or eggshell white to maintain neighborhood aesthetic harmony. I replied with a polite email, again referencing the actual HOA covenants, which, of course, made no mention of dock bumper color palettes. I attached a catalog page from a marine supply company showing that black was the industry standard. Her response was a single ominous sentence, "We'll see about that." A week later, a new emergency rule was posted on the community bulletin board, ratified by an emergency board vote, which I'm certain consisted of Brenda talking to herself in a mirror. The rule pertained to watercraft maintenance pollution. It forbade any cleaning, waxing, or maintenance of boats while docked, citing the risk of chemical runoff. This was aimed squarely at me and my weekend ritual with the Stardust. I spent an entire afternoon researching EPA guidelines and local environmental regulations, none of which my gentle, biodegradable boat soap and carnauba wax violated. I drafted a 3-page letter complete with references to state law and the chemical composition of my cleaning supplies and sent it to the entire HOA board, not just Brenda. I argued that the rule was arbitrary, targeted, and unenforceable. It was quietly rescinded 2 days later, without comment. This victory, however small, seemed to enrage her. It wasn't about the rules, it was about control, and she was losing it. This was when Frank, the retired colonel, delivered his most prescient warning. He found me reinforcing the cleat on my dock, and he just shook his head. "Son," he said, "I saw her sisters admiring your boat again. Heard them talking. Diane's got a big birthday coming up. Brenda promised her a special party on the lake. You need to be careful. That woman sees something she wants, she thinks it's already hers. She once tried to have the community pool designated for her family's exclusive use on holidays." He told me a story about how Brenda had tried to fine him for the color of the American flag he flew on the 4th of Norris. July, claiming the red was too aggressive. The woman was a walking, talking caricature of petty tyranny. Frank's warning, combined with their earlier community asset comment, was the final push I needed. That weekend, I didn't just install a security camera, I installed a system. I bought a high-definition, night vision-capable, motion-activated camera and mounted it discreetly under the eaves of my back porch. It had a perfect wide-angle view of my entire backyard, the dock, and the Stardust tied securely in its slip. I set it to record to a cloud server, so even if someone destroyed the camera itself, the evidence would be safe. I felt a little paranoid, like I was fortifying a bunker for suburban warfare, but my gut told me it was a necessary precaution. The sisters, Cheryl and Diane, became more frequent visitors. I'd see them on Brenda's deck, sipping from oversized wine glasses and staring down at my property. They had a way of looking at my boat that made my skin crawl. It wasn't admiration, it was assessment. They were like a pack of hyenas sizing up a kill. One time, I was coming back from a hardware store run and saw Cheryl actually standing on my dock, peering into the stardust. I stopped my car and just watched for a moment. She put a hand on the gunnel and rocked it back and forth, a thoughtful, calculating look on her face. I honked the horn. She jumped back like she'd been zapped with a cattle prod, scurrying back toward Brenda's house without a backward glance. The line had been crossed. This was no longer about passive-aggressive notes, this was active trespassing. That evening, I walked down to the dock and took a dozen high-resolution photos of the stardust from every angle. I took close-ups of the gleaming hull, the pristine interior, the polished chrome. And I took several macro shots of the Coast Guard capacity plate, maximum persons, 400 or 600 pounds. I saved the photos to the same cloud server as my security footage. In a folder I labeled insurance. I also started a new habit. Every time I left the house for more than a few hours, I would take my phone and record a short video walk-around of the boat and dock, stating the date and time, just to have a current record of its condition. My engineering mind treated it as a pre-flight checklist. My intuition, however, felt like I was documenting a crime scene before the crime had even happened. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place about a week before the incident. I received a certified letter from the HOA. It was a formal notice that, due to a newly discovered riparian rights clause in the original community charter from 1958, all docks were considered common property for transient mooring and access. It was a laughably transparent attempt to legally justify what Brenda was planning. I spent an evening at the county records office. For a $20 fee, I got a copy of the original charter and all subsequent amendments. The riparian rights clause she mentioned did exist, but it was specifically for the community dock and boat launch at the other end of the lake, not for private, deeded docks like mine. Furthermore, a 1972 amendment explicitly clarified this, stating that private docks were the exclusive property of the homeowner. Brenda was not just misinterpreting the rules, she was fabricating them. She was counting on me being too lazy or too stupid to check the primary source documents. It was a fatal miscalculation. I scanned the 1972 amendment and emailed it to the HOA board, CCing Brenda, with a simple message, "For your clarification." I received no reply, but I knew she'd seen it. The silence was deafening. The stage was now perfectly set. Brenda had been legally and factually cornered. A rational person would have backed down, but Brenda wasn't rational. She was cornered, yes, but like a rat, and that just made her more dangerous and more determined to get what she wanted, consequences be damned. The announcement for my temporary departure came, ironically, from Brenda herself. The HOA newsletter, a glossy monstrosity she designed, and filled with flattering photos of herself planting petunias, had a community calendar. I had mentioned in passing to a neighbor that I'd be attending the annual American Society of Mechanical Engineers conference in Chicago, and the gossip mill did the rest. The newsletter read, "A reminder that our neighbor in the blue house on Lakeview Lane will be away from the 14th to the 17th. Please keep an eye on his property." The feigned neighborly concern was nauseating. It was less a request for vigilance and more a public announcement of an unguarded target. It was the signal. Before leaving for the airport, I went through my pre-departure checklist. I double-checked the locks on my house. I confirmed the security camera was online and recording. And then I did my video walk-around of the stardust. She was perfect, bobbing gently in her slip, the morning sun glinting off her chrome. I made sure to zoom in on the capacity plate. Friday, the 14th of August, 7:30 a.m. I narrated quietly. Boat is secure and in perfect condition. I locked the gate to the dock. It was a simple padlock, but it was a clear and unambiguous symbol: keep out. I flew to Chicago, checked into my hotel, and spent the first day in mind-numbing sessions on thermodynamics and material fatigue. It was a world away from the petty drama of Lakeview Lane. On Saturday, the 15th Diane's birthday, as I'd later learn, I was between a lecture on non-Newtonian fluid dynamics and a panel on composite materials when my phone started buzzing with notifications from my security app. Motion detected in the backyard. Motion detected on the dock. I pulled up the live feed. My heart hammered in my chest. There they were. The three Furies, Brenda, Cheryl, and Diane, marching down my lawn with a chilling sense of purpose. Brenda was carrying a large cooler. Cheryl had a stack of brightly colored gift bags. Diane, the birthday girl, was wrestling with a sheet cake so large it looked like a coffee table. They reached the locked gate to my dock. Without hesitation, Brenda pulled a pair of bolt cutters from behind a nearby bush. My padlock, which I had thought of as a deterrent, was snipped in a single, decisive motion. They were on my dock. They were untying my boat, the Stardust. I watched, helpless and hundreds of miles away, as they began to load their party supplies. The cooler, which must have weighed 80 pounds, was heaved aboard. Then the pile of gifts. Then the colossal cake. Then the passengers. First, Cheryl climbed in, making the little boat groan and list precariously to one side. Then Diane, with even greater effort, flopped over the other side, causing the boat to rock violently. The water level was already alarmingly close to the gunwales. The poor Stardust was sitting dangerously low. Finally, Brenda, looking smug and triumphant, stepped aboard as if she were christening a battleship. I did a quick, horrified mental calculation. Brenda was maybe 140 pounds, but her sisters, they were easily 250 pounds apiece. That was 500 pounds of sister, plus Brenda's 140, made 640. Add the cooler, the cake, the gifts, they were probably pushing 750, maybe 800 pounds, on a boat rated for 600. My meticulously restored, 52-year-old classic aluminum boat. Brenda fumbled with the simple controls for a moment, then the two-stroke engine coughed to life. With a final, victorious wave to my empty house, they puttered away from the dock, leaving my severed padlock lying on the wooden planks like a casualty of war. The camera watched them go, heading for the center of the lake. I was no longer an engineer at a conference. I was a spectator at a slow-motion disaster I had documented from its conception. I saved the entire video file, downloaded a backup, and then called Frank. "They did it, Frank," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "They took the boat." Frank's reply was grim. "I see them out there, son. They're not looking too steady. You just sit tight." I got a feeling this situation is going to resolve itself. The phone call that changed everything came about 45 minutes later. It wasn't Frank. It was a deputy from the county sheriff's department. "Sir, are you the owner of a 1968 Starcraft, registration number STZ 1968GA?" he asked, his voice professionally flat. My blood ran cold. "Yes, I am," I managed to say. "Is everything okay?" There was a pause, and I could hear shouting and a siren in the background. "Well, sir, your vessel is currently distressed in the middle of Lake Allatoona. We're on scene with the Lake Patrol. It appears to have taken on a significant amount of water. There were 3 individuals aboard. They've been recovered. They're a bit wet and angry, but they're safe. Distressed, that was one word for it." I pictured my beautiful Stardust, my pride and joy, swamped and sinking. "The individuals aboard," the deputy continued, his tone shifting slightly, "are claiming you gave them permission to use the boat and that it was faulty." I took a deep breath. The anger was a hot coal in my stomach, but my engineer's brain was already clicking into place, processing data, planning the next steps. "Officer," I said, my voice steady and cold, "I am currently in Chicago, Illinois. No one has my permission to be on my property, let alone use my boat. I have video evidence of them breaking my lock and stealing it." The vessel was in perfect condition this morning. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I heard him say to someone else, "Hold on, I think we've got a problem here." He came back on the line. "Sir, can you get back here as soon as possible?" This situation just got a lot more complicated. I booked the first flight I could get, a red-eye that landed me back home in the wee hours of the morning. The entire flight, I was a coiled spring of fury and meticulous planning. I downloaded the security footage to my laptop. I created a timeline of events, complete with screenshots. I wrote down the names of the responding officers. I called my insurance company and opened a claim, methodically explaining the situation. The agent, once he understood what had happened, sounded almost giddy. Insurance agents live for slam-dunk cases like this. When I finally pulled onto my street, the sun was just beginning to rise. The scene was surreal. My house was cordoned off with police tape. A towboat from a marine salvage company was moored at my dock, and what was left of the Stardust was tethered alongside it. The sight of her broke my heart. The hull wasn't just swamped, it was structurally compromised. The sheer, unrelenting weight had been too much. There was a visible buckle in the aluminum along the keel line. The seams, so carefully sealed, had been sprung. She hadn't just taken on water, she had broken her back. Frank was waiting for me in his driveway with a thermos of coffee. It was quite a show, he said, handing me a cup. They got about halfway across the lake when she started settling low, real low. They didn't even notice at first. They were too busy taking selfies and eating cake. Then she started taking on water over the stern. That's when the screaming started. You could hear it all the way over here. Neither of the big ones can swim much, apparently. Looked like two cats in a bathtub. They were lucky the patrol boat was nearby. Just as the sun cleared the trees, the white Range Rover pulled up. Brenda stormed out, followed by her sisters, now wrapped in oversized bathrobes and looking like a pair of profoundly grumpy walruses. Brenda saw me and marched right over, her face a mask of indignation. "You?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You are in so much trouble. Your rickety death trap almost killed my sisters. We are going to sue you for everything you have. Negligence, endangerment." Her sisters flanked her, nodding vigorously and making wounded noises. This was the moment, the confrontation they had initiated and I had prepared for. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get angry. I just took a calm sip of my coffee and looked her dead in the eye. "Brenda," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion, "did you enjoy your joyride? I hope the cake was good." Her face went from red to purple. "We had permission. You told me we could take it for Diane's birthday." She sputtered, glancing nervously at the deputy who was now walking toward us. "Really?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "Because I was under the impression I was in Chicago. And I was also under the impression my dock gate was locked." The deputy arrived. "Ma'am, we need to get your official statement," he said to Brenda. "He's lying." Cheryl bellowed from behind Brenda. "The boat just fell apart. It was a wreck." "A wreck?" I repeated, finally letting a little edge creep into my voice. "That wreck was a classic vessel rated for 4 people or 600 pounds. Let's do some math, shall we?" I looked from Cheryl to Diane and back again. They had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "Brenda, I have 47 minutes of high-definition video showing you, your sisters, your bolt cutters, and your 800 pounds of cake and cargo trespassing on my property and stealing my boat. So, I recommend you choose your next words very, very carefully, officer." I said, turning to the deputy, "I'd be happy to provide you with a copy." The color drained from Brenda's face. Her entire manufactured reality, her narrative of victimhood, had just collided with a brick wall of documented fact. The suburban tyrant had finally met an opponent who didn't just get mad, he got evidence. The fallout was swift and spectacular. It was like watching a Jenga tower collapse in slow motion. The deputy took my USB drive containing the video file as evidence for grand theft and destruction of property. Brenda, Cheryl, and Diane stood there, their mouths opening and closing like beached carp as the legal reality of their situation dawned on them. Their blustering threats of lawsuits evaporated, replaced by the very real prospect of criminal charges. My insurance company, armed with the police report and my video, was a thing of beauty to behold. They paid my claim for the full insured value of the Stardust, a generous sum I had insisted on when I bought the policy without a single question. Then, their subrogation department, which is the polite term for their legal piranhas, turned their full attention to the three Furies. They sued them civilly for the entire amount of the payout, plus the cost of the salvage operation. But that was just the beginning. The county sheriff's department, not appreciating their resources being wasted on a rescue operation caused by a felony, billed them for the man-hours of the deputies and the lake patrol, including fuel and equipment usage. It was a hefty 5-figure invoice. Their threatened lawsuit against me for having a faulty boat was, of course, never filed. Their own lawyer, upon viewing the security footage, probably advised them to plead for mercy and hope to avoid jail time. The real fireworks, however, happened at the emergency HOA meeting. News of the incident had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The story of Brenda's borrowing of my boat had become local legend overnight. The meeting was packed. People I'd never even spoken to were there, standing in the back of the community clubhouse. Brenda, looking pale and diminished, tried to control the proceedings. She started by attempting to frame the whole thing as a misunderstanding among neighbors. That's when I stood up. I didn't have to say much. I had connected a projector to my laptop. With a click of a mouse, the image of Brenda wielding the bolt cutters filled the screen on the clubhouse wall. The room fell silent. I let the video play. The whole sordid affair, from the snipping of the lock to the moment they sputtered out of frame, played out for everyone to see. There were gasps. There were murmurs. Frank, the colonel, let out a low whistle. When the video ended, I clicked to the next slide, a crystal-clear photo of the Coast Guard capacity plate. 600 pounds, I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. That's the legal limit. Physics is not a suggestion. It's a law. One that Brenda and her family decided to ignore. I then put up the final slide, a screenshot of the bill from the county sheriff's department, which someone had anonymously slipped into my mailbox. The collective gasp was audible. Brenda didn't even try to defend herself. She, along with a tearful Cheryl and Diane, who had inexplicably shown up for moral support, simply fled the room amidst a chorus of angry shouts and accusations from their former subjects. The next day, a motion to remove her as president passed unanimously. The epilogue to this saga was deeply, deeply satisfying. Brenda and her sisters, facing criminal charges and a mountain of civil debt, sold the white Range Rover and Brenda's house. They moved away to some undisclosed location, their reign of terror over. The new HOA board, led by a sensible retired accountant, went through the covenants and ceremoniously struck every single one of Brenda's petty, vindictive emergency rules. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. It felt like a liberation. My insurance payout was more than enough to cover the loss of the Stardust. I could have bought an identical boat, but it wouldn't have been the same. Instead, I decided to upgrade. I spent weeks researching, and finally found my new dream boat, a 21-foot Chris Craft launch. It was sleek, powerful, and beautiful, with a gleaming mahogany deck and deep blue hull. And the very first thing I checked was the capacity plate. Maximum persons, 10 or 1,500 lbs. I had it mounted in a place of special prominence on the console. A few weeks after I brought her home, I found a package on my doorstep. It was from Frank. Inside was a small, custom-engraved brass plaque. It read, "The Stardust Memorial Award for Excellence in Applied Physics." I mounted it right next to the new capacity plate. Now, on quiet Saturday mornings, when I take my new boat out onto the glassy surface of the lake, I sometimes think of Brenda, Cheryl, and Diane. I picture them, wherever they are, perhaps having a quiet birthday party on dry land, and I have to smile. They set out to ruin my weekend and teach me a lesson about who was in charge. Instead, they ended up buying me a brand new, vastly superior boat and restoring peace and sanity to an entire community. I'd call that a pretty good trade. And as for Bartholomew, my little garden gnome, he's still there, fishing pole in hand, a silent guardian against any future incursions of mythological entitlement.